Welcome to Feminism Today, everyone. I'm Sophia Johnson in New York. Achut Deng was a child living through the Sudanese civil war. She was a teenager when she managed to escape Sudan to a Kenyan refugee camp. And she was a young woman when she arrived in the United States as a refugee. And she is a mother carrying a secret weight until she decided to write a book and share the details with her son, and now with us. Achut writes about her life in Sudan and in America in her new memoir, Don't Look Back. She co-wrote the book with Keely Hutton, and they are joining us both this week. Welcome to Feminism Today.
Thank you, Sophie. It's nice to be here.
So much to unpack. This is an absolutely brilliant project. The courage of the Sudanese people and their ability and capacity to envision a different future for themselves echoes powerfully through your memoir. I wonder if we could just start with this question. If you could tell us a little bit about what life was like before you arrived in the United States.
Thank you so much, Sophia. So great to be here. Life before I arrived in the United States, of course, when I was in South Sudan in the Deng compound before the village attack, it was a little I can remember. It was awesome. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was a compound full of love. As a child, that's all I can remember. It was full of love. And then after the attack, all of that peaceful and joy and love was swept away. Then I end up in Kakuma refugee camp, where life was nothing but hope until I came to the United States. And so life in the refugee camp was really life because I was breathing, but it was hope to wake up the next day.
Keely, can you tell us a little bit about how you two met?
So I actually wrote a book several years ago. It was my debut novel, Soldier Boy, which I worked with a gentleman by the name of Richard Anwar to chronicle his life as a child soldier with LRA in Uganda. And that was published with Macmillan. So when Achut's story, came across to them through an interview she did with Caitlin Dickerson for the New York Times, there was a publicist at Macmillan who heard the podcast that she had done and was so moved by it, she felt that there was a deeper story there that should be explored. They reached out to Achut to see if that was something she was interested in doing. And Achut was, she wanted to share that story for her sons and for other people who might be, feeling lost and feeling alone in their pain and their trauma. But she said, that I'm not a writer. And so they looked for a collaboration. And I was one of a handful of writers and journalists that Achut interviewed to work with her on her very important memoir. And I'm honored to have been chosen. It was a privilege to work with Achut.
Achut, you're trying to build a new life for yourself and your children. Can you tell us a little bit about this collaboration with Keely? You decided you were going to first tell your children. How did this whole conversation come about?
So the conversation, of course, it came about, as Keely mentioned, with the interview with the New York Times, with Keely, not Keely, I'm sorry, Caitlin Dickerson, and then from Caitlin to the Daily Podcast. And so Joy Paskin and Molly, when Joy reached out to me, of course, I was ready for it.
Yeah.
And then when I did the interview, I went for Keely. Everybody did great. But what I was looking for, I needed someone who is going to put my memoir out in a very respectful way, not too direct, because I am raising children. So, but my history, my past is going to go first to my 3 boys.
Yeah.
So I needed someone who is going to put it out to the world, but first to my children. someone
Mm,
who is going to consider them. And Keely, when I asked this question to everyone, Keely answered, it got me. It went straight home for me. And she
mm,
did an amazing job
mhm,
with how she covered, not that she covered my memoir or everything that had happened to me, but she took my children to where they used their own imagination. This is what happened to mom, but not too
mm,
direct to where they want to, to put the book down.
mm.
And so that's, yeah, that was the reason I picked Keely Hutton.
Very nice. So, Keely, have you been to Sudan? Can you walk us through how you were able to work with Achut in recreating the story?
So I have not been to Sudan before. When Achut and I started working together, when Macmillan reached out to me initially to see if this was a project I'd like to be considered for, it was October 2020. So we were right
Mm,
at the height of the pandemic. Everything was locked down. And actually, Achut and I, we worked together for 2 years and didn't actually meet in person until this past October when we met in Chicago when we were
wow.
finishing the book, and
Yeah.
it was amazing. But so what we did was fantastic. She had a very busy work schedule, and she has 3 sons at home that she's raising, and she was extremely flexible. When we first started working together, she was working nights,
Hmm.
and so she would literally get home, from work, try to sleep for a little bit,
Yeah.
go take her boys to school,
Hmm.
sleep a few more hours, and then get up and get on the phone with me for 2 hours before she had to turn around and go back to work. And
Wow.
we spoke on the phone 3, 4 days a week. And even since the book's been done, we still talk on the phone 3 to 4 days a
Oh.
week. We had such a bond.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she was so accessible and she was so trusting with her truth.
Hmm.
And we tried to establish very early on. I think for the first 2 weeks that we didn't even talk about your story. We just talked. We talked
Mm.
about motherhood. We talked about raising boys. And just got to know each other so that we could
Yeah.
build that foundation of trust because we were perfect strangers. We didn't know each other prior to this project, so it was important for us to build that trust. And then when it came to trying to describe places like Warrenall, her village, I relied on Achut's memory and then research, and then we also had a sensitivity reader
Hmm.
who vetted the book before it came out as well, just to make sure that the details were as accurate as possible, with me not ever having stepped foot in Sudan
In
or Kenya.
Sudan. Right. Achut, what do journalists get right or wrong in their coverage of the refugee crisis in Sudan?
I would not say what did they get right or wrong, because we all have. I have to rely on a journalist when
Hmm.
somebody go, and especially America is a very blessing country where freedom of speech is so open. You will
Mm,
have journalists, you have a reporter on the TV telling the truth, and
mm,
there is no one there to attack them. To where if you go to other countries and you have a journalist try to say the truth of
mhm,
what they see on the street or front line, probably the next day they might not make it. And
mm,
so for me, seeing, having um, journalists here or reporters here in the United States, for me, it's a blessing. And
mhm,
so that was my first thing when I first had contact or talk with Caitlin Dickerson.
mm,
I was very pleased, and that trust it will never go anywhere because her and I, we now become friends. Our it's not or she's not a reporter to me anymore.
yeah,
That relationship went to a different level because if you have someone that is there speaking the truth about the voiceless, this is how I take the journalists, the
mhm,
reporters. These are the people that are speaking on behalf of those who cannot afford to speak the truth on their behalf.
yeah. Keely, could you tell the viewers a little bit about why you started the story the way you started, and what was it about that particular unique experience that encouraged you that that was the perfect place to start the story?
So we knew we had discussed that it was going to be a young adult offering. So in looking at that, we wanted to find a place to launch the story from, and we kind of went back and forth, and we hadn't really figured out what the heart of the story was.
Mhm.
And I went back, with my notes. The very first thing I asked Achut when we had a phone call together was how to correctly pronounce her name, because I'd heard it pronounced a few different ways. And it was important to me. I felt it was important to her that I was, pronouncing her name correctly. It's her
Yeah.
name, part of her identity. And so, she told me phonetically how to say it. And then she added on that she was like, well, I wasn't Achut for most of my life. My name was Rachel. And I was like, what? Let's talk about that a little bit. And she
Oh
went on to
no.
explain,
Yeah.
right? She went on to explain, how at age 3, when she was baptized, this name that had meant so much and was part of her lineage, Achut, this beautiful name, had been taken from her and replaced with this name Rachel, just because it was a biblical name.
Mm.
So that really struck a chord with me. And I remember getting off the phone with Achut, and I was like, I look for what I call the goosebump moment. And that's usually when I
Mm.
know that I've hit what's going to be the heart of the story. And I had that goosebump moment. And I was like, okay, let's not act too hasty. And I went for a walk and I thought about it more. And it just occurred to me that starting at age 3,
Mm.
Achut started having little pieces of herself taken away, starting
Oh,
with, starting with her name.
yeah.
So what we decided to do, we couldn't really start the story with chapter 1 at age 3 because of the young adult offering. And, usually you look to have a teen,
Yeah.
as the main character for the first chapter. So once I talked to Achut, and I was like, this really is a story about all that you lost, but then that pivotal moment of when you decide, no, no more, I'm taking it back. This is my life. And she started reclaiming and rebuilding the pieces of her life that had been
Mm.
destroyed or taken from her. So I talked to Achut about it. I was like, how do you feel about if we have a very short first chapter that starts at your lowest point when you have lost everything?
Mm.
And show her at that lowest point, then jump in chapter 2 with her at age 3 before everything starts going wrong, and showing all the things she lost to get her back to that moment in that closet in Houston where she then makes the decision, no, no more. And
Wow, so powerful. I mean, it's such a powerful story and a perfect setup for my next question for Achut, which is, can you take us back to your village when you decided to leave? How did you leave, and what made you decide ultimately, I'm out?
So the village, South Sudan, I did not decide to leave South Sudan. That decision, somebody else made it for me.
Hmm.
There was a village attack in 1991, and that's how I left my village at age 6 with my grandmother. And that attack happened in the middle of the night. Um, so a few days later, I lost my grandmother,
Hmm.
and I had never went back since then. Um, so that's so yeah. When we talk about leaving South Sudan or how I left the village,
Hmm.
that decision clearly it didn't come from me. Somebody else made it for me,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm I I'm not stuck on that because it was not my decision. There was more worse that came
Hmm.
immediately 2 days after I left the Deng compound, and,
Hmm.
and the worst start with the with losing the woman who literally gave me the confidence of me being me. And I
Hmm.
learned that from the name of Rachel because she had never called me that. So yes, Keely put it perfectly. That's how it happened. This name Rachel came over me. My grandmother had never called me that name,
Hmm.
and yes, so leaving the village was never my choice. Um, but yes,
I felt that so strongly because I'm also very close to my grandmother. So thank you for sharing that. I just want to take a moment to honor her memory for you and for the memoir, and also, for what you have set out to do with this project. Keely, can you tell us a little bit about the writing process? You've sort of painted this picture of um, the couple of hours you speak, couple of hours a week, and there's a lot of back and forth. Can you tell us, Achut just went a little bit deep for us, and I felt that so strongly. Did you have a lot of these sort of emotional moments where you had to pause?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. As I said before, I had worked with a gentleman who was a child soldier. But so there were some similarities. The two countries, Uganda and South Sudan, share a border, and it was around the same time period. So there's some similarities with working with both Achut and Ricky. But the biggest difference was that Ricky had kind of processed his pain, and he had for years been working through his trauma. With working with Achut, I was the first person she had ever told her story to. So this was very raw for her. It was very right at the surface. And so what we ended up doing, I tend to be a very organized writer. So I plot out the chapters. I kind of figure out what the plan is going to be moving forward. And Achut and I would talk, like I said, 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes 4. And we'd talk. I would take notes. We'd discuss what we thought should happen in those chapters, what we wanted to focus on. I would work on writing them, and then I would send them to Achut. She would review them. We talk, and we were always doing, talking, interviewing, writing, revising, kind of all at the same time. It was
Yes.
all happening at once. But as far as the emotional impact of the story, I noticed very quickly, and Achut was very honest about it, that there were certain scenes, especially the chapters with her grandmother, that were very hard and brought up a lot of traumatic memories for her. So we would jump around. I said, okay, let's not work on, we had a deadline. I was like, we're going to step away from these years. Let's look at something that happened in Portland, Oregon, and give her some time to breathe before coming back in tackling those chapters again. But it was very obvious that, we had to put her mental health, her emotional health at the forefront, and the rest of it we'd get done, when we could.
Yeah. Now, Achut, you said elsewhere, another interview, your grandma was a guiding light, and you sort of echoed that a few minutes ago. She's the one who really told you, don't look back. Tell us about that conversation, that last conversation you may have had with your grandma.
So the night, the night of attack, of course, it was dark. There was no light, and so the only light we had was the light from the moon. And so I was getting my little feet. I was getting tired, and I was scared. There was sound everywhere. The sound of the gun. Children crying, women crying, men and cows, and so I keep looking back. I keep looking back, and she said, "Achut, don't look back. It will slow you down."
Mm.
That phrase, I had never forget that. Her last word when she got killed was, "You are strong." And so every time every time I feel like I'm giving up, it's like, no, I can't look back.
Right.
Her images, the images
Mm.
from the war or from the Boer town, the skeletons,
Mm.
I have to constantly remind myself. And even when I was in the closet trapped, it was her that reminded me. She is always around me, even though she's not physically here.
Mm-hmm.
Her soul is always with me. And so
Yeah.
with that title, Don't Look Back, I carry that. That's how I learned to move forward. Is that it's a constantly reminder for me from her.
Yeah. 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 I feel that so strongly. Keely, I wonder if you about the emotional pain of carrying this story, reliving it in conversation with Achut, and how you tell this story to young people without, the burden, the weight of it all. How did you do that so effectively?
Well, I'm a mother as well, and I have 2 boys, and I used to be an 8th grade English teacher, so I think I kind of have that 13, 14-year-old age range in mind anytime I'm writing. That's the target audience, which fell in line with the ages of Achut's oldest boys, and
Mhm.
that was, when she and I discussed what she hoped for the book, she was like, I need my boys to know me.
Mhm.
And she was very concerned that the graphic nature of some of the violence and the assault didn't overshadow the inspiration and the hope and the joy that her message carries, the
Mhm.
strength that carries. So my approach always when writing about sensitive material is that I take the reader up to the point where they know what's going to happen. You know, they've connected the dots, they see where it's going, and then I stop and I allow their imaginations to take them as far as they're comfortable going. Because as Achut said, we never, you know, you don't want a reader to have to close a book and put it down and never pick it up again and never
Mm.
get to the message of the story
Yeah.
that's really revealed towards the end.
Yeah.
So, you know, we try to be very respectful of Achut's story and what happened to her, respectful of describing the trauma
Mm.
without making it voyeuristic, you know,
Yeah.
completely unnecessary or triggering to other readers.
Mhm. Now, Achut, you were really quite young, as you mentioned, as is echoed in the memoir when you left. But as an adult, it doesn't take much time to sort of go online and see the truth of what is, what was. I want to talk a little bit about Sudan for people who don't really understand the Horn of Africa, the stories and the many stories, myriad of stories coming out of that region and that space. Sudan is one of the youngest countries in the U.S., and the U.S. was really instrumental in realizing that vision, but challenges remain. Um, what can you share, you know, in terms of your experiences and understanding about the political situation in Sudan as we see it today? What do you think is really going on?
You know, when I was, I this is how I'm going to put it. War to me, it will, it only affect those who are vulnerable, and it come down to children,
Mm,
women, and that's what happened in South Sudan. Whether is yes, when I was young, it was, yeah, it's the war in South Sudan is about politics. It's of course it's politics. Is religion is between Muslim and Christian, and
yeah,
Christianity.
yeah,
That's what I understood at the time. And then, but then, did it stop? We
yeah,
got we got the we South Sudan is no longer a Sudan.
yeah,
It is now a South Sudan,
yeah,
but there's still a refugee camp within South Sudan. So is that still a Muslim thing? Is that still a Christianity thing? Is that
yeah,
a tribe thing?
yeah,
Is that someone within South Sudan? Why is South Sudan still fighting among themselves?
mm,
Is it a government issue?
yeah.
My father was ripped away from me. I was robbed of growing, of my childhood.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
then, South Sudan being the youngest country today, how come, why are we still fighting? Why is South
Yeah,
Sudan still fighting? How come
yeah,
those fathers can't have peace anymore? So I
yeah,
still have those questions as an
yeah,
adult today.
yeah. Keely, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how you guys decided what to include in terms of some of the contemporary experiences. We certainly didn't want, I imagine in your conversations, you don't want to pretend that what's happening right now is not happening. So, how did you decide to contextualize? For example, there have been lots of protests since Achut left. There have been lots of uprisings, lots of protests, lots of social issues sort of spilling over in the political space. How did you sort of gauge what to include and what to exclude in terms of the reality of Sudan?
It was definitely a challenge because we were looking at, you know, once we decided to start her story really at age 3, you know, and take you through until age 16, 17, and then have that final chapter where, you know, she's in her 20s. That's a lot of time to cover. And
Yeah,
so you do have to look at the experiences, which ones were pivotal to a unique story,
yeah,
um, there are a lot of, I'm sure, similarities. If other Sudanese lost girls or lost boys read Achut's story, I'm sure that they are going to connect on many levels to things that happened in their lives as well. But ultimately this is Achut's memoir. It's her unique story. So we need to look at, as with her as the main character, what was pivotal to her growth, what was pivotal to her character arc. And one of the things that, when they approached me about working with Achut, and I started talking with her, that I found very interesting about her story is that we weren't going to end it with she got the golden ticket and got to come to the United States, happily ever after, because that wasn't the reality of her situation. And in honesty, that's not the reality of many immigrant refugees, situations. They face new challenges when they come to the United States. So we wanted to show the scope of the entire experience for Achut, what happened to her in Sudan with the war, what happened to her in the refugee camp in Kenya, to give you a glimpse at all sides of that refugee experience, and then the challenges she also faced here in the United States, and continues to face.
What do you think advocacy and activism should look like?
When I worked with Ricky, he had a really interesting we had a conversation about Uganda, because he runs an orphanage in Uganda called Friends of Orphans. And one of the things he said is that with war, the people, as you said, that are the most vulnerable, that are most victimized, are usually the women and the children. And that those are the same people that don't have a seat at the table when discussions are being made about war and conflict. They don't have a voice. And we need their voice. If they're the populations that are being the most affected, the most traumatized, they deserve to have a voice in what's going to happen. As Achut said, so much of her life, she didn't have a choice in what happened to her. And we need women to be able to make these choices for themselves, for their children. And one of the beautiful things I thought about Achut's story is that not only is it about her being the strong woman, but it's her being raised by all these strong women. All these women come into her life throughout the experiences and the trauma, and they carry her and they lift her up. And I love that you see this arc now of Achut lifting and carrying other women by telling her story. And I hope that continues and gives women the strength and confidence, as Achut said, to tell their truth, to lift their voices. And then maybe if our voices get loud enough, they will be heard at those tables when some of these decisions are being made.
Achut, you get the final word. What is your hope for the future of Sudan, the women of the region, through your book project?
I just hope that the peace is going to come one day in Sudan. I just hope that, our people are going to see there is more in life. There is more in life than fighting, because like Keely said earlier, in Kakuma refugee camp, there was Nuer, there was Equatorian, there was Dinka, and all of us had lost in some kind of way. And so I just hope that for South Sudanese people, men, women, and children, and those who are in power, they will be able to see enough is enough. Let's go for peace. And this tribe thing is smaller than life. Tribe is smaller than life. Color of our skin is smaller than life. My skin color does not describe who I am. You need to understand who I am on the inside. And that's what South Sudan need to come down to, not the tribe. So I'm hoping that peace will come one day. And the little girls of South Sudanese are going to be able to sit down and say, okay, this is what I'm going through, and I am going to talk. I'm going to speak up. I'm being told to be quiet, and I'm tired of that. Achut did it, and I am going to follow her footsteps.
I love that. Achut Deng, Keely Hutton, co-authors of Don't Look Back, a memoir of war, survival, and my journey from Sudan to America. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you so much, Sophia. This was wonderful.
And that's it for our program today. Remember, you can follow me and the show on Instagram or Twitter. Thank you so much for watching Feminism Today on Free Speech TV. Join us again next week.